Michael Turner was 68 years old when the first real scare came. A retired high school history teacher from a quiet town in Oregon, he had always considered himself relatively healthy. He enjoyed tending his vegetable garden, walking his Labrador in the crisp morning air, and meeting his old colleagues for coffee every Friday. But one morning, as he bent down to tie his shoes, a strange wave of dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred for a moment, and his heart thumped heavily in his chest. At first, he dismissed it, blaming fatigue or perhaps not enough breakfast, but deep down, he felt an unease that wouldn't go away. The following week, when the dizzy spells returned, this time accompanied by a pounding headache, he knew it was time to see the doctor. The tests revealed what Michael had feared but never quite expected. His blood pressure was dangerously high, his cholesterol numbers were climbing, and his circulation was showing signs of strain. The doctor explained that while medication could help, it would be wise to make immediate changes to his lifestyle. Michael sat in the sterile exam room, staring at the neat rows of medical charts on the wall, and thought about his father, who had died of a sudden stroke at 71. The memory of that loss hit him with fresh force, and for a moment he felt like a boy again, helpless, worried, and suddenly aware of just how fragile life could be. At home, Michael's wife, Linda, listened quietly as he recounted the appointment. She had been nudging him to take his health more seriously for years, but she never wanted to nag. This time, though, she gently placed her hand on his and said, "Mike, we can turn this around. Let's start small, but let's start today." Her calm confidence gave him a sense of hope he hadn't felt when he left the clinic. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, jotting down changes he could make, cutting back on processed foods, walking longer each morning, and looking for natural ways to support his heart and immune system. It was during one of those late-night research sessions, scrolling through health articles and old herbal remedy books, that Michael stumbled upon a simple yet intriguing idea. Garlic water. He had always used garlic in his cooking, roasting cloves for Sunday dinners, mincing them into pasta sauces, but he had never thought of drinking it. The more he read, the more fascinated he became. Garlic, it seemed, had been treasured for centuries as both food and medicine, from the kitchens of ancient Rome to the apothecaries of medieval Europe. There were stories of farmers drinking garlic infusions to stay strong during long winters, and even accounts of athletes in ancient Greece taking garlic to boost stamina before competitions. What really caught his attention, though, was the science. Studies described garlic's ability to lower blood pressure, improve circulation, fight inflammation, and even strengthen the immune system. It was rich in compounds like allicin, known for its powerful antibacterial and antioxidant effects. Michael thought about his own health concerns, the sluggish circulation, the risk of heart problems, the creeping fatigue, and the idea that something as humble as garlic could help stir a spark of optimism in him. He bookmarked the articles, printed out a few, and slid them into a folder labeled New Health Plan. The next morning, Michael mentioned it to Linda over breakfast. She raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Garlic water? Well, it can't hurt to try. You've always been adventurous in the kitchen." They agreed to make a batch that very day. Linda found a simple preparation method. 3 fresh cloves, crushed lightly, steeped in hot water for several minutes. The aroma filled the kitchen, sharp yet earthy, with a warmth that felt almost medicinal. Michael hesitated at first, the steam rising from the mug carrying that unmistakable garlicky punch. But he took a sip, surprised to find that it wasn't nearly as harsh as he'd imagined. The heat softened the flavor, and with a dash of lemon and a hint of honey, it was almost pleasant. Over the following week, Michael made garlic water part of his morning routine. He drank it before breakfast, often while gazing out the kitchen window at the garden, where the first spring shoots were breaking through the soil. He didn't expect instant miracles, but he was curious to see if he would notice any difference. By the end of the first week, he realized that his morning walks felt a little easier. The heavy, sluggish feeling in his legs seemed lighter, and he found himself breathing more freely on the small, uphill stretch near his house. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. Encouraged, he kept going. He read more about garlic's benefits and began tweaking his recipe, sometimes adding ginger for extra warmth, sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon to balance the sharpness. He found that the ritual itself was helping him feel more in control of his health, like each mug of garlic water was a quiet promise to himself to keep going, to keep choosing life and vitality over fear and decline. Linda noticed the changes too. His energy seemed steadier throughout the day, and he was less irritable in the evenings. Even their walks together felt different, lighter, more filled with easy conversation rather than quiet fatigue. But what truly sealed Michael's commitment came a month later during a follow-up visit to his doctor. His blood pressure had dropped noticeably, and his cholesterol numbers had begun to improve. The doctor, flipping through his chart, looked up with a small smile. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said. Michael nodded, thinking of the steaming mug waiting for him at home. It wasn't the only change he had made. He was eating better, moving more, but he was convinced the garlic water was part of the difference. It wasn't just about the physical improvements, it was about the quiet sense of empowerment it gave him each morning, the knowledge that he was taking an active role in protecting his health. Now, months later, garlic water is as much a part of Michael's life as his morning walks and his evening chats with Linda over tea. He's shared the recipe with friends at the coffee shop, his grown children, even a neighbor who struggles with frequent colds. Each time he tells them the same thing: it's simple, it's natural, and for him, it's been worth it. He doesn't claim it's a miracle cure, but in a world where so many solutions come in the form of pills and complicated regimens, he's found comfort in something humble, affordable, and rooted in centuries of tradition. And so, if you've been feeling the weight of fatigue, the quiet warning signs of age creeping in, perhaps a blood test that didn't look quite right, or a cough that lingers a bit too long, maybe it's time to consider the wisdom of something as simple as garlic water. Michael's journey is not unique, and that's exactly the point. It could be your story too, one small step at a time, one morning mug at a time, toward a healthier, more vibrant life. Michael Turner had never been much of a morning person. Retirement had softened his schedule, and more often than not, he'd ease into the day slowly, coffee in hand, a glance through the morning paper, and maybe a short stroll if the weather was kind. But lately, the mornings had felt heavier, almost sluggish, as though the simple act of waking up was a task in itself. His legs ached in a dull, unremarkable way, his mind seemed slow to catch up with the day, and there was an unshakable sense of tiredness clinging to him. It wasn't just age, he thought, it was something deeper. He remembered the doctor's words from his last visit. "It's time to take small but consistent steps toward your health." They had echoed in his mind for weeks, mingling with the growing awareness that life was too precious to be dulled by fatigue. One rainy Tuesday morning, Linda placed a steaming mug in front of him at the breakfast table. The sharp, earthy aroma of garlic rose with the steam, surprising him. "Garlic water," she announced with a smile. "You've been reading about it, and I thought, why not start today?" Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head at her persistence. The scent was strong, unfamiliar as a drink, but something about the moment felt different. This wasn't just another health tip from a magazine, it was the first tangible step in his new plan. He lifted the cup, took a careful sip, and felt the warmth spread through him like a quiet encouragement. The first week was an experiment. Some mornings, Michael added a squeeze of lemon to brighten the flavor, other times a spoonful of honey to soften the sharpness. He kept a small notebook on the counter, jotting down how he felt each day. Less sluggish today. Walk felt easier. Slept well last night. The entries weren't dramatic, but they were steady, and each one told him the same thing. Something was shifting. By the 5th day, the habit had woven itself into the fabric of his morning, as natural as brushing his teeth. It wasn't only his body that noticed the change. His mindset was different too. There was a quiet pride in starting each day with a choice that felt purposeful. The garlic water wasn't a chore, it was a promise to himself. Linda, ever the quiet observer, began to notice small changes in his demeanor. He lingered less in the chair after breakfast and moved more easily toward the garden or the walking path. There was a little more spark in his eyes when he talked about the day ahead. One morning, as he poured hot water over the crushed garlic cloves, Michael remembered his father's words from years ago. "The way you start your day sets the tone for everything else." Back then, he hadn't paid much attention, but now those words felt almost prophetic. The garlic water wasn't a magic potion, but it was a tangible signal, a way of telling his body and mind that the day would be lived with intention. He realized that in caring for his health, he was also caring for the life he and Linda had built together. The habit began to ripple outward. Because he started the day on such a grounded, positive note, he found it easier to make healthier choices later on. Lunches leaned more toward fresh vegetables and grilled fish than heavy sandwiches. Afternoon snacks became apples or a handful of almonds instead of cookies. The garlic water seemed to be more than a drink. It was a quiet catalyst, a morning ritual that whispered, "You're doing this for you." And somehow that whisper was enough to make the next good choice, and the next, and the next. Still, there were mornings when Michael doubted whether such a small act could really matter. But then he would remember the look on his doctor's face when they'd first talked about lifestyle changes, the cautious hope in his voice. "It's the small, consistent steps that make the difference," the doctor had said. And so Michael kept going, trusting that the real change was happening quietly, under the surface, like the roots of the garlic bulbs sprouting in his own garden. The truth was, the garlic water wasn't just helping his body, it was reshaping his relationship with his mornings, with his health, and with himself. And while he didn't yet know the full extent of the transformation ahead, he had a growing sense that this humble habit was the key that had finally turned the lock. Michael had never been overly concerned about his skin. After all, he was a man in his late 60s, and a few lines and age spots felt like well-earned badges of a life well lived. But over the past few years, he'd noticed something different. His skin seemed duller, slower to heal, and prone to small breakouts he hadn't dealt with since his younger days. Linda teased him once about a stubborn pimple on his cheek, and he laughed it off, but inside he wondered if it was yet another sign that his body wasn't keeping up the way it used to. It was Linda who first pointed out a change, not in a teasing way this time, but with quiet curiosity. One sunny afternoon, they were sitting on the porch sipping tea when she tilted her head and said, "Your skin looks clearer lately. Brighter even." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Clearer? Really?" She nodded, squinting at him as though trying to solve a mystery. "Maybe it's the garlic water," she said with a knowing smile. At first, he brushed it off as coincidence, but then he started noticing it himself. When he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror in the morning, his skin didn't seem as tired or blotchy. The redness that often lingered around his nose had faded. Even the fine lines near his eyes looked softer, though he knew they hadn't magically disappeared. There was a freshness there, subtle but undeniable. The truth was, Michael's diet had been improving since he'd started his garlic water routine, but garlic itself seemed to be doing something more. He remembered reading about how it contained allicin, a natural compound known to help fight bacteria and inflammation. Maybe that was why those little flare-ups had become less frequent. He thought about all the times his skin had felt inflamed after shaving or after a day in the garden under the sun. Lately, those irritations healed faster, as though his body was quietly working more efficiently behind the scenes. One evening over dinner, Michael mentioned it to his daughter, Claire, who was visiting from Portland. Claire worked in a wellness clinic and was always curious about her parents' health habits. "That actually makes sense, Dad," she said, nodding. "Garlic has antimicrobial properties. If you're drinking it every day, it's not just helping your heart, it could be helping your skin stay balanced and fight off the little infections that cause breakouts or irritation." She smiled and added, "You might become the poster boy for senior skincare." Michael laughed, shaking his head. "At my age, I think I'll just settle for looking a little less tired." Still, her words stuck with him. There was something satisfying about knowing that his daily habit was working in ways he hadn't even expected. It wasn't about vanity, it was about feeling healthy, about looking in the mirror and seeing a face that reflected the energy he was starting to feel inside. He realized that for years he'd accepted the idea that aging meant a steady decline in how he looked and felt. But now each small improvement was a quiet rebellion against that belief. Linda, of course, was delighted. She began making little comments as she handed him his morning mug of garlic water. "Here's your skin tonic," she'd say with a wink. She even joked that she might start drinking it herself. And she did, occasionally joining him for a cup, though she claimed she preferred hers with more lemon and honey. On the mornings when they drank it together, Michael felt a simple joy in sharing the ritual. It was no longer just his health experiment, it was a small piece of their life together. One Saturday, while they were shopping at the local farmer's market, Michael found himself scanning the stalls for the freshest garlic he could find. He picked up bulbs still covered in papery skin, their cloves plump and fragrant. The vendor, a cheerful woman in her 50s, noticed his interest and leaned in conspiratorially. "That's good garlic," she said. "You know, my grandmother swore by garlic water for her skin. She lived to 96 and hardly had a wrinkle." Michael chuckled, but tucked the story away in his mind. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest remedies carried wisdom far older than any medical study. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that garlic water had become more than just a drink. It was a conversation starter, a link to traditions that crossed cultures and generations. His grandparents might not have had the scientific language for antioxidants or antimicrobial compounds, but they had understood in their own way that food could be medicine. And now, in his own kitchen decades later, Michael was rediscovering that truth in a form as humble as a steaming mug of garlic water. Over the next few weeks, his confidence grew. He no longer avoided looking at himself in the mirror in the morning. When neighbors stopped by, they often commented on how well he looked. "You seem younger these days," one said as they chatted over the fence. Michael would smile and shrug, not quite ready to give away his secret. But inside, he knew it wasn't about vanity. It was about alignment, about his body quietly beginning to match the way he wanted to live. Perhaps most importantly, this change in his skin was a visible reminder that his efforts were working. It was easy to measure numbers on a chart, blood pressure, cholesterol, but seeing a difference in the mirror each day carried its own kind of motivation. It made him eager to keep going, to see what else might change if he stayed consistent. And while garlic water was just one part of his new approach to living well, it was the one that had surprised him the most so far. As he rinsed out his cup one morning, Michael thought about how strange it was that such a simple kitchen ingredient could become such an important part of his life. The skin improvements were just the beginning. He could feel there was more to come, and deep down, he knew that what he was really drinking each morning wasn't just garlic water, it was possibility, steeped in hope, flavored with resilience, and served with the quiet belief that small choices, made daily, could transform a life. Michael had been married to Linda for over 40 years, and theirs was a relationship built on a deep companionship that weathered everything from raising children to unexpected health scares. By the time they were both in their 60s, the passionate early days of their marriage had mellowed into a comfortable, steady rhythm. They still held hands when they walked down the street, still shared knowing glances across the dinner table, but the spark that had once lit up their younger years now flickered more softly. It wasn't a problem they talked about much. It just seemed like part of getting older. Energy faded, routines took over, and physical closeness sometimes took a back seat to the comfort of familiarity. But in the months after starting his garlic water habit, Michael began noticing subtle shifts, things he hadn't expected at all. It started with his energy. He wasn't just more awake in the mornings, he felt lighter during the day, more eager to go for longer walks, more interested in doing small projects around the house. There was a liveliness in his step that he hadn't felt in years. Linda noticed it too. "You've got a bit of your old bounce back," she teased one Saturday morning as he busied himself in the garage. Michael grinned, but didn't say much. Inside, though, he felt it. His body was waking up in more ways than one. The real surprise came one evening when they were watching an old movie together. It was a film they had seen years ago on one of their early dates. And as the closing credits rolled, Michael found himself looking at Linda in that way he hadn't in a long time. She caught his gaze and smiled, a little shyly, as though reading his thoughts. Something between them had shifted, not dramatically, but enough for them both to notice. Over the following weeks, that renewed warmth spilled into their everyday lives. They lingered over breakfast a little longer, shared more laughs during their evening walks, and found themselves naturally gravitating toward moments of closeness that had once felt like a distant memory. Michael couldn't help but wonder if it was the garlic water playing a role. He remembered reading how garlic could improve circulation, not just to the heart and brain, but throughout the body. Better blood flow often meant better energy, more responsiveness, and in some cases, a rekindled spark in the area of intimacy. Whether it was entirely physical or partly the result of feeling healthier and more confident, he didn't know, but he wasn't about to question it. Whatever the reason, the change felt good. One evening over tea, Michael decided to mention it to Linda in his own lighthearted way. "You know," he said, "this garlic water might have some unexpected side effects." She raised an eyebrow. "Side effects?" He leaned closer, smiling. "Let's just say, I feel 20 years younger in certain ways." Linda laughed, shaking her head, but there was a soft blush in her cheeks. "Well," she said with a grin, "I'm not complaining." It wasn't as if they suddenly turned back into newlyweds. Life still moved at its steady pace, and they still had their routines. But those routines began to include more moments of connection, sharing a kiss in the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove, curling up together on the couch without the distraction of phones or television, and talking late into the night about memories they hadn't revisited in years. There was a warmth in their home that hadn't dimmed, but had, over time, settled into the background. Now it was shining a little brighter again. Michael found himself feeling grateful for this unexpected gift. It wasn't about vanity or chasing youth, it was about rediscovering a part of life that added richness to the everyday. He knew many couples his age who had quietly let go of that side of their relationship, assuming it was gone for good, but he and Linda were finding that it didn't have to be. Sometimes the body just needed a little help, a nudge toward vitality, a reminder that age didn't have to mean the end of certain joys. The more he thought about it, the more Michael realized how closely physical health and emotional closeness were tied. Feeling stronger and more energetic made him more confident, and that confidence seemed to ripple outward. He stood a little taller, spoke with more enthusiasm, and looked Linda in the eye more often. She responded in kind, matching his energy with her own. It was as if they had both been quietly waiting for the other to make the first move, and the garlic water, of all things, had tipped the balance. One Sunday afternoon, while they were walking through the park, Linda squeezed his hand and said, "You know, Mike, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I like this version of you." Michael smiled, a deep, satisfied smile that came from more than just her words. It was the smile of a man who had been given a second chance at something he didn't even realize he'd been missing. From that point on, the garlic water became more than just a health habit. It was a quiet symbol of their renewed connection. Each morning when Michael crushed the cloves and poured the steaming water into his mug, he wasn't just making a drink. He was starting the day with an act of care, not only for his own body, but for the bond he shared with Linda. And every evening when they settled into bed, he carried that same sense of care with him, knowing that the small choices they made now would shape the years they still had ahead. Looking back, Michael sometimes marveled at how something so simple could create such a ripple effect. He had started the garlic water for his heart, for his blood pressure, for his overall health. He hadn't expected it to touch the deeper, more personal parts of his life. But that was the beauty of it. Health wasn't just about numbers on a chart. It was about living fully with energy, connection, and warmth. And for Michael and Linda, that warmth was burning a little brighter now, one humble cup of garlic water at a time. Michael had always taken a certain quiet pride in his hair. Even as friends his age began to lose theirs or turn completely silver, he still had a decent head of salt and pepper hair that Linda sometimes ran her fingers through when they were watching TV together. But over the last couple of years, he'd noticed more hair gathering in the shower drain, and when he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror under the bright light, his hair seemed thinner in places. It wasn't vanity so much as a gentle reminder that time was moving on. Still, it made him a little wistful. It was Linda who noticed the change first, this time in a positive way. One morning, as Michael was rinsing his mug after his daily garlic water, she tilted her head and said, "You know, your hair looks thicker lately." Michael chuckled. "Thicker? I doubt it." But when he combed his hair that day, he realized she might be right. It felt fuller in his hands, less brittle than before. He wasn't sure if it was just wishful thinking, but the difference was enough for him to pause and wonder. He remembered reading somewhere that garlic was rich in vitamins and minerals, especially vitamin B6, vitamin C, selenium, and manganese, all of which played a role in hair health. There was even mention of how garlic helped boost the production of glutathione, a protein that protects cells and supports growth. At the time, he had brushed off the information as interesting but not urgent. Now, looking at his hair in the mirror, he wondered if there might be something to it. Over the next few weeks, Michael became more aware of little changes. His hair seemed shinier, less dry at the ends. When he ran his fingers through it, it didn't feel as fragile as it once had. Linda teased him about checking his hair in the mirror more often, but she said it with a smile. "I'm just glad you're noticing the good changes," she told him one afternoon as they sat on the porch. "You're putting in the effort, and your body's responding." One evening, their daughter Claire came over for dinner and casually mentioned, "Dad, your hair looks good, like healthier than last time I saw you." Michael laughed. "So now it's official? My hair's making a comeback?" Claire grinned. "Hey, I'm just saying, whatever you're doing, keep it up." It felt like a small but meaningful victory, not because hair alone defined his health, but because it was another sign that the little choices he was making were building up into something real. Michael also realized that the change in his hair wasn't happening in isolation. He was eating better overall, more leafy greens, lean proteins, and fresh fruits. The garlic water, he believed, was part of a bigger picture. It wasn't just about the nutrients in the garlic, it was about how the habit had shifted his mindset toward caring for himself in ways he hadn't in years. Curious to explore further, Michael started experimenting in the kitchen. He began adding garlic to more of his meals, not just as a flavor booster, but as a deliberate choice. Garlic roasted vegetables became a favorite side dish. He mixed fresh, minced garlic into homemade vinaigrettes for their salads. Sometimes he even tried garlic-infused olive oil drizzled over grilled fish. He wasn't just drinking garlic water anymore, he was finding ways to weave its benefits into the rest of his diet. Linda, of course, was happy to join in. She had her own reasons. She'd read that garlic could support skin and bone health for women, especially after menopause, but she also enjoyed the shared experience. Preparing meals together, swapping recipes, and laughing over the sometimes pungent aroma that lingered in the kitchen became part of their routine. Michael couldn't help but think about the small but steady confidence boost these changes were giving him. He'd never been one for expensive grooming products or fancy supplements. For him, health and self-care had to be simple, natural, and practical. The garlic water fit that perfectly. It was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and carried centuries of tradition behind it. The fact that it seemed to be helping his hair was just a bonus, a visible reminder that he was nourishing his body from the inside out. One morning, after finishing his cup, Michael stepped outside into the garden to tend to the herbs. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a soft golden light over everything. He reached up to run a hand through his hair, feeling the cool morning breeze against his scalp. It struck him how far he'd come in such a short time, not just with his hair, but with his overall sense of vitality. The man who had once started his mornings sluggishly now began them with purpose. The man who had worried about his health after a difficult doctor's appointment was now feeling stronger, brighter, and quietly proud. The improvements in his hair weren't about turning back the clock. They were about seeing tangible proof that his choices were paying off. And each time he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw the healthier strands catching the light, he felt a renewed sense of determination. This was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Michael found himself talking more openly with friends about what he was doing. At the coffee shop, he shared his garlic water story with an old golfing buddy who had been complaining about thinning hair. At church, he mentioned it to a fellow retiree who was curious about natural remedies. He didn't preach or promise miracles, but he spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who had seen results for himself. Hair, after all, wasn't just about appearance, it was about identity. And for Michael, this small change was a reminder that even in his late 60s, his body was still capable of surprising him in good ways. Every time he crushed those garlic cloves and poured hot water into his mug, he felt like he was doing something kind not just for his hair, but for his whole self. And in the quiet moments, when Linda brushed her fingers through his hair and smiled, he knew this was about more than just the strands on his head. It was about vitality, about being present in his own life, and about choosing, day after day, to take care of himself in the simplest, most enduring ways. Michael had always known that his heart health was something he needed to watch closely. His father had died of a sudden stroke at 71, and his older brother Paul had suffered a mild heart attack just 2 years earlier. Those events had been sobering reminders, but like many people, Michael had tucked them into the back of his mind, convincing himself he still had plenty of time. That illusion shattered the day his doctor looked at his blood pressure readings and cholesterol numbers and said, "Mike, you've got to start taking this seriously now." That conversation replayed in his mind often, but it didn't just scare him, it pushed him to act. When he began his garlic water habit, heart health was at the top of his list of reasons. He'd read enough to know that garlic had been shown to help lower blood pressure and reduce bad LDL cholesterol, but at first he wasn't sure how much difference it could really make. It was just a drink after all. Weeks passed and Michael began to notice small but telling signs. His morning walks felt easier, not just because his legs were less heavy, but because he wasn't breathing as hard on the small hill near his house. He also realized he wasn't experiencing those occasional bouts of chest tightness that used to come when he hurried up the stairs. Linda noticed too. "You're not huffing and puffing like you used to," she said one morning as they climbed the hill together. He smiled, quietly encouraged. Michael began reading more about how garlic worked in the body. He learned that the compound allicin, released when garlic was crushed, could help relax blood vessels and improve circulation. It wasn't magic, it was simple science and nature working together. That understanding gave him a sense of confidence. He wasn't relying on a fad or a quick fix. He was giving his body a tool it could actually use. His next checkup was the real turning point. Sitting in the exam room, he half expected the numbers to be only slightly better. Instead, his blood pressure had dropped to a healthier range, and his LDL cholesterol was down more than his doctor anticipated for such a short time. "Whatever you're doing, Mike, keep doing it," the doctor said with a rare smile. Michael nodded, thinking of the mug of garlic water he'd had that very morning. But it wasn't just the numbers that mattered, it was the way he felt. Michael realized he had more stamina throughout the day, and the constant, low-level fatigue that had been dragging him down was fading. There was a quiet steadiness in his body now, a sense that his heart was working with him, not against him. Linda, who had always been the more health-conscious one, became his biggest cheerleader. She made sure they always had fresh garlic in the pantry and started experimenting with heart-healthy meals that complemented his new habit. Salmon with garlic lemon sauce became a weekly favorite. Roasted vegetables with a generous sprinkle of minced garlic showed up on their dinner plates often. Their kitchen began to smell more like an Italian farmhouse than a suburban Oregon home, and Michael loved it. One Saturday morning, while they were preparing breakfast together, Michael thought about how differently his life felt now compared to just a few months ago. He still had the same responsibilities, the same routines, the same challenges, but his energy, his mood, and even his outlook on the future had shifted. He wasn't living in quiet fear of his heart failing him anymore. He was actively doing something every single day to protect it. It wasn't lost on him that these changes were as much about mindset as they were about garlic. Drinking that steaming mug each morning had become a symbol of his commitment to himself, to Linda, and to their shared life. It was proof that he could take control of his health, one small, consistent action at a time. The ripple effects went beyond his own life. His brother Paul, who had been struggling to stick to his post-heart attack regimen, grew curious after hearing about Michael's progress. "Garlic water?" Paul had laughed over the phone. "You're telling me that's making a difference?" Michael simply said, "It's not just the garlic water, it's what it's helping me do. It's keeping me on track." Eventually, Paul decided to give it a try himself. One crisp autumn morning, Michael and Linda took their longest walk in years, following a trail that wound through golden leaf trees along a gentle river. As they walked, Michael could feel the strength in his steps, the steady rhythm of his breath, and the solid beat of his heart. It struck him how much he'd been missing this simple joy, the freedom of moving without worry, the pleasure of being outdoors without feeling like his body was holding him back. That evening, sitting by the fireplace, Michael sipped his tea and thought about how his journey had unfolded. The man who once felt hesitant and anxious about his health now felt grounded and optimistic. The fear that used to creep in late at night had been replaced by a quiet assurance that he was doing his part. He knew life offered no guarantees, but he also knew he was no longer waiting passively for his health to decline. Garlic water wasn't a miracle cure, and he never pretended it was. But for Michael, it had been the key that unlocked a chain of positive changes: better eating habits, more movement, a stronger connection to his own well-being. And at the center of it all was the simple, powerful truth that protecting his heart didn't have to be complicated. It just had to be consistent. Every morning now, as he crushed those fresh cloves and poured hot water into his mug, Michael thought of it as an act of gratitude, not just for the day ahead, but for the days still to come. He had learned in the most personal way that the heart was worth protecting, and that sometimes the smallest steps could lead to the biggest changes. Cancer had always been a word that made Michael uneasy. He'd seen too many friends and neighbors face it over the years, some winning their battles and others not. His own mother had passed away from colon cancer when she was 75, and that loss had left a quiet shadow in the back of his mind. It wasn't something he thought about daily, but it was always there, a reminder of how suddenly life could change. When his doctor gently reminded him that family history played a role in his own risk, it only deepened his commitment to doing whatever he could to lower that risk. It was during one of his late-night reading sessions, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, that Michael stumbled upon an article from a well-respected cancer research organization. It explained that certain compounds in garlic, particularly sulfur-based ones like allicin, were linked to cancer prevention. These compounds, it said, could help repair damaged DNA, slow the growth of abnormal cells, and even activate the body's own defense systems to fight off potential cancerous changes. Michael leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. Garlic water had already become a cornerstone of his daily routine, but now he saw it in a new light. It wasn't just supporting his heart, it might also be helping him stand guard against one of the most feared diseases of aging. The more he read, the more the pieces started to fit together. He remembered how his mother had always loved cooking with garlic. She never called it healthy, it was simply part of her kitchen. Maybe she had known in her own way that food could be medicine. And now, decades later, Michael felt he was carrying on that tradition, only this time with the added clarity of science to back it up. One evening, while chopping vegetables for dinner, Michael mentioned it to Linda. "Did you know," he began, "that garlic might help protect against certain cancers?" She looked up from rinsing lettuce. "I've heard that. Why?" Michael explained what he'd read, how the compounds in garlic could slow cell damage and even help the body repair itself. Linda listened, nodding slowly. "Well," she said with a gentle smile, "then it sounds like every cup you drink is a little insurance policy." It wasn't that Michael thought garlic water alone could shield him from cancer. He knew life was never that simple. But he also knew that every bit of support counted. And garlic, with its centuries-old reputation and growing pile of scientific studies, felt like a powerful ally. That knowledge gave him another reason to keep the habit going, even on mornings when he might otherwise be tempted to skip it. In the months that followed, Michael noticed something else. His digestion seemed smoother, his energy more stable. He read that these too could be indirect benefits of garlic's influence, keeping the gut healthy, supporting the immune system, and reducing inflammation, all of which could contribute to lowering cancer risk. The connections made sense to him. A healthier body overall was a body better equipped to defend itself. He began talking about it more openly with friends. One afternoon, over coffee with his old colleague Daniel, the topic came up. Daniel had recently lost his sister to breast cancer and was looking for ways to improve his own health. "Garlic water?" Daniel asked, eyebrows raised. "I thought that was just for blood pressure," Michael smiled. "That's what I thought too, but it turns out it might be doing more than we realize." He explained what he'd learned, careful not to overpromise, but encouraging Daniel to look into it himself. Back at home, Michael and Linda made garlic a more prominent part of their meals. They tried roasted garlic spread over warm bread, garlic-infused olive oil drizzled on salads, and soups enriched with slow-cooked cloves. The flavors were comforting, but more than that, they carried a quiet reassurance. Each bite, each sip felt like another step toward building a stronger foundation for their health. Sometimes, when Michael stood at the counter crushing fresh cloves for his morning water, he thought about the invisible work those little bulbs might be doing inside him. He pictured them as tiny soldiers moving through his bloodstream, repairing, defending, and quietly fighting battles he'd never even know about. It was a hopeful image, one that made the morning ritual feel almost sacred. The real reward, though, was the peace of mind. Michael knew that nothing could guarantee a cancer-free life, but he took comfort in knowing he was giving his body every possible advantage. It wasn't about living forever, it was about living well for as long as he could. And if something as simple as garlic water could help tip the balance in his favor, then it was worth every sip. One cool spring morning, as he sat on the porch with his mug warming his hands, Michael reflected on how far he'd come since that unsettling doctor's appointment months earlier. Back then, he'd felt uncertain, even a little powerless. Now he felt engaged in his own health, an active participant in the story of his life. And while garlic water might seem like a small detail in that story, it had become a thread running through every page, a reminder that sometimes the simplest choices could hold the deepest meaning. Michael had never been obsessed with his weight, but over the years, the numbers on the bathroom scale had slowly crept up. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a pound or two here and there, but it added up. By his late 60s, his waistline felt snug in pants that had once fit comfortably, and bending over to tie his shoes took more effort than it should have. He told himself it was just part of aging, but he knew better. The extra weight wasn't just about appearance, it was affecting how he moved, how he breathed, and how he felt each day. After his doctor's warning about heart health, Michael began making small changes to his routine. Garlic water had been one of them, and he'd started drinking it every morning before breakfast. At first, he didn't connect it to weight loss, he simply thought of it as a heart helper and an immune booster. But about 6 weeks in, he noticed something surprising. His belt notch moved in one hole tighter, his shirts fit a little looser around his middle, and when he stepped on the scale, he realized he was down nearly 5 pounds. The best part, he hadn't been starving himself. In fact, he felt satisfied after meals, with fewer cravings for sugary snacks in the afternoon. Linda noticed it too. "You're not prowling the kitchen at night anymore," she said one evening with a smile. Michael laughed. "I guess my midnight cookie raids are officially over." He started to wonder if the garlic water was playing a role. Curious, he looked it up and learned that garlic could help boost metabolism and even suppress appetite for some people. The science explained that it might help the body burn calories more efficiently while also regulating blood sugar levels so energy stayed steadier throughout the day. That steady energy, Michael realized, was probably part of why he wasn't reaching for quick sugar fixes like he used to. His daily walks became easier too. Carrying a little less weight meant less strain on his knees and hips. He even began to enjoy a gentle jog for a few steps during his morning route, just to see how it felt. "Careful, you'll start training for marathons next," Linda teased when she caught him jogging to the mailbox one afternoon. Michael just grinned, secretly pleased with his progress. Meals at home began to shift naturally. With more energy and less hunger between meals, Michael and Linda found themselves eating smaller portions without feeling deprived. They filled their plates with colorful vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, seasoning generously with garlic and herbs. Friday nights, once reserved for takeout pizza, became nights for experimenting with lighter, home-cooked meals. One of their favorites was baked salmon with a garlic lemon glaze, served alongside roasted broccoli and quinoa. It was filling, flavorful, and left them both satisfied without the heavy feeling that used to linger after restaurant food. What Michael appreciated most was that he never felt like he was on a diet. He'd tried structured diets in the past, and they always felt like a battle, counting calories, measuring portions, and fighting against hunger pangs. This was different. The changes felt natural, like his body was guiding him toward better choices without the constant mental tug-of-war. Garlic water had simply been the quiet catalyst that set those changes in motion. His friends began to notice too. At the coffee shop one Saturday morning, his old golf buddy, Frank, raised an eyebrow and said, "You're looking leaner these days, Mike. What's your secret?" Michael smiled and took a sip of his coffee. "It's not a secret, really. Just better habits. And maybe a little help from garlic water." Frank chuckled. "Garlic water? That's a new one. Does it keep the vampires away too?" Michael laughed, but he could tell Frank was curious. The deeper Michael went into this journey, the more he realized how interconnected everything was. Shedding a few pounds wasn't just helping his joints and stamina, it was also improving his sleep, his mood, and even his confidence. He carried himself differently now, standing a little taller, moving with a bit more ease. Linda, ever the gentle observer, pointed it out one evening. "You just seem lighter," she said. Michael knew she meant more than just physically. Of course, there were still occasional indulgences, a slice of cake at a birthday party, an extra helping of mashed potatoes at Sunday dinner. But these no longer derailed him the way they once might have. His appetite had adjusted, and his body seemed better at telling him when it had had enough. Garlic water hadn't magically erased his love for good food. It had simply helped bring his eating habits into balance. One crisp autumn morning, Michael stepped on the scale and saw that he was down 12 pounds from when he'd started his new routine. It wasn't a dramatic transformation by TV show standards, but for him, it was a huge victory. More importantly, he knew he could sustain it. He didn't feel like he was chasing a finish line, he was simply living in a way that worked for his body, and the results were following naturally. That night, as he and Linda enjoyed a simple dinner of roasted chicken with garlic and rosemary, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the pounds he'd lost, but for the way those pounds had quietly taken with them so many little discomforts. Aching knees, afternoon crashes, restless nights. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he also knew he'd found a way forward that didn't feel like a struggle. Garlic water had started as a small morning ritual. Now, it was part of a larger shift that was helping Michael reclaim the way he felt in his own body. It was proof that even at 68, change was possible, not through deprivation or extreme measures, but through small, consistent steps rooted in self-care. And as far as Michael was concerned, that was the kind of weight loss worth celebrating. Winter in Oregon had always been a test for Michael. Cold, damp air seeped into his bones, and the shorter days seemed to carry with them an unspoken invitation for every seasonal bug to make itself at home. For years, he'd resigned himself to catching at least one nasty cold every winter, often two. Sometimes it would start as a tickle in his throat, sometimes as a stuffy nose, but inevitably it would settle into a cough that lingered for weeks. Linda would brew him hot tea, fetch extra blankets, and remind him to rest, but the cycle always repeated itself. Last winter, however, something unusual happened. Nothing, not a single sore throat, not even a sniffle. At first, Michael thought it was just luck. After all, he was careful about washing his hands and avoiding crowded places when flu season hit. But by the time spring rolled around, he realized there might be more to it. He'd been drinking garlic water every single morning since the start of autumn. Could that really have made the difference? Michael remembered reading that garlic contained compounds, like allicin, that could help the body fight off viruses and bacteria. It wasn't just folklore, there was research to back it up. Garlic had been used for centuries as a natural defense against illness, from ancient Greek soldiers who ate it before battle to his own grandmother, who would crush a clove into honey whenever someone in the family came down with a cold. The logic was simple. A strong immune system is the best shield you can have, and garlic seemed to strengthen his like nothing else had. One evening in January, as they sat by the fire, Linda commented on it. "You know," she said, "this is the first winter I can remember where you haven't spent a week on the couch coughing." Michael grinned. "Don't jinx me," he said, though he secretly shared her amazement. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe it's the garlic water," he chuckled. "Maybe so. Either that or I've finally scared the germs away." It wasn't just that he was avoiding illness, it was the way he felt all season long. His energy stayed steady. He didn't have the midwinter slump that used to make even short walks feel like an effort. The air still had its damp chill, but he didn't feel weighed down by it. And when friends mentioned fighting off stubborn colds, Michael realized just how different his winter had been. One Saturday morning, his neighbor George stopped by while Michael was pruning the rose bushes. George was bundled in a heavy scarf, sniffling. "I've been knocked out all week," George said, rubbing his nose. "Flu got me good." Michael handed him a pair of gardening gloves and said, "You know, you might laugh, but I've been drinking garlic water every morning. Haven't had so much as a sniffle this year." George raised an eyebrow. "Garlic water? You serious?" Michael nodded. "Serious enough to keep it up every day. It might be worth trying." Michael didn't think of garlic water as some magic shield. It was part of a bigger picture. He was walking daily, eating better, and getting enough sleep. But the garlic felt like an extra layer of armor, one that seemed to make all the other healthy choices work even better. When you start each day with something that strengthens your immune system, you give yourself a head start against whatever's going around. Linda eventually joined him in the habit. She added a bit more lemon and honey to hers, preferring a sweeter version, but she drank it alongside him most mornings. "If it's keeping you healthy, I want in," she said with a smile. And sure enough, that winter she sailed through without her usual post-holiday head cold. They started to see the ritual not just as a personal health choice, but as something they shared, a little act of care for themselves and for each other. The real proof for Michael came in late February, when the flu tore through his church community. At least half a dozen people he knew had been laid low for days, some even ending up at urgent care. Michael and Linda had been at the same services, shaking hands, sharing hymn books, sitting in close quarters. And yet they both remained healthy. Michael didn't chalk it up to luck anymore. In his mind, the garlic water was doing its quiet work every single day, giving his immune system the strength it needed to fend off trouble before it could take hold. By spring, the habit was so ingrained that Michael couldn't imagine starting his day without it. The mug of garlic water had become as much a part of his morning as brushing his teeth or lacing up his walking shoes. And with each sip, he felt a quiet confidence, not just in avoiding colds, but in his body's ability to stay strong year-round. One afternoon, as he sipped his garlic water on the porch, Michael thought about how different his winters used to be. He remembered the frustration of being sidelined for days, the lingering fatigue that sometimes lasted well into March. Those days felt like a different lifetime now. This winter had been full of long walks, dinners with friends, and quiet evenings by the fire, not boxes of tissues and bottles of cough syrup. For Michael, that was the real victory. It wasn't just about avoiding a week of misery, it was about reclaiming the season. It was about having the energy and freedom to live fully, even when the weather outside seemed determined to slow him down. Garlic water had given him that gift, and he wasn't about to give it up. And as far as Michael was concerned, the real secret wasn't that garlic water kept away colds. It was that it kept him living the life he wanted, season after season, without fear of being knocked off course by something as small as a virus. In his book, that was worth far more than the few minutes it took to crush a couple of cloves each morning. Michael had always considered himself lucky when it came to his lungs. He'd never been a smoker, never worked in dusty environments, and generally avoided anything that could harm his breathing. But as he got older, he began noticing something unsettling. On cold mornings, especially when climbing stairs or tackling the small hill on his walking route, his chest felt tight. Sometimes he had to pause, catch his breath, and wait for the air to flow in more freely. It wasn't dramatic enough to send him rushing to the doctor, but it was enough to make him wonder if his lungs were quietly losing their strength. Linda noticed it too. One chilly morning last fall, as they strolled through the park, she asked, "Are you okay? You've stopped twice already." Michael nodded, trying to smile it off. "Just need to catch my breath." But inside he was worried. He knew that shortness of breath could be a sign of more than just aging. It could point to inflammation, weaker circulation, or even early signs of respiratory conditions. That was around the same time he deepened his garlic water habit, drinking it faithfully every morning. He hadn't made the connection at first, but over the weeks, he noticed those moments of breathlessness becoming less frequent. His morning walks felt easier. The cold air didn't bite as sharply in his lungs. And when he worked in the garden, bending and lifting without rushing, he didn't find himself gasping for air like before. Curious, Michael dug into his research again. He learned that garlic contained compounds such as diallyl sulfide with natural anti-inflammatory properties. Inflammation, he read, wasn't just about swollen joints. It could also affect the lungs, narrowing the airways and making breathing harder. By reducing inflammation, garlic could help air move more freely, easing the burden on the lungs. That clicked with his experience. It wasn't just in his head. Something real was happening inside his body. One evening over dinner, he mentioned it to Linda. "You know, I think this garlic water might be helping my breathing," he said. She looked at him thoughtfully. "I've noticed you're not stopping as much on our walks, and you didn't cough once during church last Sunday." Michael smiled, realizing she was right. Those little improvements were adding up in ways he hadn't fully appreciated. The true test came in early winter, when cold, damp air usually made his lungs feel tight. That year, he managed to shovel the driveway after a heavy snowfall without feeling winded. In the past, he would have needed to take breaks every few minutes, leaning on the shovel while catching his breath. But this time, he just kept going, slow and steady, but without the old discomfort. When he came inside, cheeks flushed and breathing easy, Linda gave him a look of pleased surprise. "You're not even wheezing," she said. Encouraged, Michael decided to build on the progress. He started incorporating gentle breathing exercises into his mornings after drinking his garlic water. Just a few deep, slow breaths, expanding his lungs fully and holding for a moment before exhaling. It felt good, almost meditative, and seemed to pair naturally with the warmth of the drink. He imagined the garlic's anti-inflammatory benefits working in tandem with his breathing practice, strengthening his lungs one sip and one breath at a time. One Saturday afternoon, while helping his neighbor George move some firewood, Michael realized just how far he'd come. They worked for over an hour, stacking logs and hauling them across the yard, and at no point did he feel that familiar tightness in his chest. When George paused to wipe his brow and catch his breath, Michael stood beside him, feeling surprisingly steady. "You been working out?" George asked. Michael chuckled. "Not exactly, just taking better care of myself." He didn't mention the garlic water then, but he knew it was part of the story. In conversations with friends, Michael began to see a pattern. Many of them accepted shortness of breath as an inevitable part of aging, something they could do little about, but his own experience was proving otherwise. He realized that small, consistent habits, like his morning garlic water, could over time create noticeable differences in how the body functioned. The lungs, like the heart, thrived when cared for. Linda, always looking for ways to make the habit enjoyable, began experimenting with flavor variations. She sometimes added a pinch of turmeric to the garlic water for extra anti-inflammatory support, or a slice of fresh ginger for warmth. Michael found that he looked forward to these subtle changes, and each variation seemed to bring its own small comfort. It wasn't just a health habit anymore, it was a ritual, a shared moment between them that set the tone for the day. The real victory came during their annual spring trip to the coast. Michael loved walking along the windy beach, but in past years, the brisk sea air had sometimes made him cough. This time, he strode along the shore for nearly an hour, breathing deeply without a hint of discomfort. He stopped now and then to watch the waves crash, the salty breeze filling his lungs without resistance. It felt like freedom, pure, unburdened breathing. That evening, as they sat in their small rental cottage sipping tea, Michael reflected on how much this simple daily habit had given back to him. It wasn't just about avoiding illness or easing symptoms, it was about reclaiming a part of his life he hadn't even realized he'd been losing. Being able to breathe easily, without hesitation or discomfort, opened the door to more movement, more adventures, more living. For Michael, that was the true gift of garlic water. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a gentle, steadfast ally, one that worked quietly, sip by sip, to keep him moving forward. Every time he poured that hot water over the crushed cloves in the morning, he felt he was filling his day with possibility, with the confidence that his body could still carry him where he wanted to go. And as far as Michael was concerned, that was worth every single sip. Michael had always been sharp-witted, the kind of man who could recall dates, names, and long-forgotten stories with ease. Friends admired his memory, especially when he'd slip in details from decades past during conversations. But in the last few years, he'd noticed small slips. He'd forget where he'd put his glasses or pause mid-sentence searching for a word. Once, he even missed a turn on the drive to a familiar grocery store. They weren't alarming lapses, but enough to plant a seed of worry. It didn't help that memory loss ran in his family. His uncle had battled dementia in his final years, and watching that decline had been heartbreaking. Michael had promised himself, quietly but firmly, that he'd do everything in his power to protect his mind for as long as possible. He wanted to keep telling stories to his grandchildren, keep remembering the way Linda's eyes had looked the first time they met, keep holding on to the details that made life rich. One rainy afternoon, while reading an article on aging well, Michael came across a section about garlic and brain health. It explained how oxidative stress and inflammation played a major role in cognitive decline, and how garlic's powerful antioxidants could help protect brain cells. In particular, compounds in garlic were shown to boost antioxidant enzymes in the body and improve blood flow to the brain. Better blood flow meant better oxygen and nutrient delivery, exactly what the brain needed to function at its best. Michael was intrigued. He'd started garlic water for his heart, but here was evidence that it might be doing double duty, caring for his mind as well. The thought gave him a quiet surge of determination. If this simple ritual could help shield his memory, even in some small way, he'd keep it up without question. Over the next months, Michael began paying closer attention to how he felt mentally. He noticed his focus was steadier. Crossword puzzles that had once taken him an afternoon now came together more quickly. He could recall details from conversations without having to stop and think. These weren't dramatic changes, but they were enough for him to feel that his mind was benefiting from his new lifestyle. Linda, too, noticed subtle shifts. One evening, after they'd finished a round of their favorite card game, she laughed and said, "You're on a winning streak lately. Either I'm getting rusty or you're sharper than ever." Michael grinned. "Maybe it's the garlic water," he said, half joking but half believing it. He began weaving more brain-healthy habits into his days. Morning walks became a chance to memorize poems or mentally list state capitals in alphabetical order. In the evenings, instead of idly watching television, he and Linda would tackle jigsaw puzzles or play strategy games together. These activities, combined with the anti-inflammatory and circulation-boosting effects of garlic, felt like armor for his mind. One afternoon, while visiting their daughter Claire, she mentioned she'd read about the connection between heart health and brain health. "They say what's good for the heart is usually good for the brain," she told him. Michael nodded. "Makes sense. Blood flow feeds both. And that's why I'm sticking with my garlic water. It's like sending a delivery truck full of oxygen and nutrients straight to my brain every morning." The real test came when he helped organize the community's annual history trivia night. Michael had done it for years, but this time he was struck by how easily the historical facts came to him as he set the questions. During the event, he fielded questions from participants without hesitation, recalling names, dates, and events with the same ease he'd had in his teaching days. Walking home with Linda that night, he felt a quiet pride. His mind was still strong, still capable of holding the threads of memory that made him who he was. For Michael, protecting his memory wasn't about avoiding every small lapse. Those happened to everyone. It was about preserving his independence, his relationships, and his sense of self. Garlic water wasn't the only piece of that puzzle, but it had become a cornerstone habit, a daily promise to care for both body and mind. He often thought about his uncle in his final years and wished he'd known then what he knew now. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape his own future. And every time he poured that steaming water over crushed garlic cloves, he imagined it as a gift to his future self, a safeguard for the man he wanted to remain. By the time spring arrived, Michael had made peace with the fact that aging was inevitable, but decline didn't have to be. His brain, like any other part of his body, thrived on nourishment, movement, and care. And garlic water, in its humble way, was helping him deliver all three. On quiet mornings, as he sat with his mug in hand and a crossword puzzle in front of him, Michael would think about the years ahead. He wanted them to be filled with laughter, stories, and shared memories, not confusion or fading recognition. And so he kept sipping, day after day, knowing that every small act of care added up. For Michael, garlic water wasn't just about living longer, it was about living fully with a mind as clear and steady as the man holding it. Michael had always prided himself on being able to keep up with the people around him. In his teaching days, he could spend hours on his feet, guiding students through lessons, breaking up debates in the classroom, and still have enough energy to grade papers late into the evening. But in the years after retirement, he began to notice that his stamina wasn't what it used to be. A morning of light gardening would leave him ready for a nap. A trip to the grocery store, followed by a walk with Linda, felt like a full day's work. He had chalked it up to aging, telling himself, this is just how it goes. But deep down, he missed the days when he could keep moving without constantly checking his internal fuel gauge. That was one of the reasons garlic water had appealed to him in the first place. He'd read about how it had been used for centuries, not just as a food and medicine, but as a way to boost endurance. Ancient Greek athletes reportedly ate garlic before competitions, and Roman soldiers were said to consume it before long marches and battles. At first, Michael didn't think much of that history. It sounded more like an interesting trivia fact than something that could actually apply to him. But as the weeks passed and garlic water became his daily habit, he began to notice subtle shifts. He could work in the garden for hours without feeling drained. He could walk longer distances without the heavy-legged fatigue that used to cut him short. Even climbing the stairs to their bedroom at night didn't leave him breathing harder than he liked to admit. One Saturday morning, Michael decided to test himself. He suggested to Linda that they take the long, walking trail that wound around the outskirts of town, a path they hadn't tackled in over a year because it felt too tiring. They packed a small picnic and set out just after breakfast. To his surprise, the first few miles passed easily. The air was crisp, the sun warm, and his body felt strong. They stopped at a bench halfway through to share sandwiches and tea from a thermos, and then continued on without hesitation. By the time they returned home, Michael realized they'd walked nearly twice as far as they used to, and he still had enough energy left to help Linda prep dinner. He wasn't sure if it was purely the garlic water or the combination of all his new habits. Better diet, regular walks, improved sleep, but the difference in stamina was undeniable. And the best part was that it didn't feel forced. He didn't have to push himself through fatigue. His body simply kept going, steady and strong. That night, he decided to read more about why garlic might have this effect. He learned that garlic could help improve circulation and increase the body's ability to transport oxygen to muscles. Better oxygen delivery meant less fatigue during activity. On top of that, garlic's ability to support heart health meant his cardiovascular system was working more efficiently overall. The science lined up perfectly with what he was feeling in his own body. Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself looking for opportunities to be active rather than avoiding them. He offered to help a neighbor move some heavy planters. He joined Linda on longer shopping trips, carrying the heavier bags without complaint. He even said yes when their grandson, Caleb, asked him to play an impromptu game of soccer in the backyard. To his delight, he managed to keep up for most of the game, laughing as he chased the ball and only stopping when Caleb scored with a triumphant shout. Linda noticed the change too. "You seem unstoppable lately," she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Michael grinned. "Let's just say I've got some ancient Greek secrets working for me." She rolled her eyes with a smile. "Well, whatever it is, I like it. You're more present, more engaged. It's like you've got your spark back." That spark wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Feeling more capable physically made Michael feel younger at heart. He no longer hesitated to say yes to spontaneous plans, whether it was a weekend hike, a family outing, or an afternoon project around the house. The fear of running out of energy before the day was done had faded into the background. One day, while chatting with his old friend Frank at the local coffee shop, Michael mentioned the change. Frank had been complaining about feeling sluggish and out of shape. "You know, I've been drinking garlic water every morning," Michael said. "I can't say it's the only reason, but I feel better than I have in years. More energy, more endurance. It's like I've got more in the tank." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Garlic water? That's your big secret?" Michael just smiled. "It's one of them." The real test of his new stamina came during a visit to his daughter Claire's house. She'd been reorganizing her garage and asked if he could help. The old Michael would have dreaded the thought of hours of lifting, moving boxes, and sweeping out dusty corners. But this time, he threw himself into the task. They worked side by side for most of the day, stopping only for lunch. At the end, as they admired the cleared space, Claire shook her head. "Dad, I thought we'd have to spread this over 2 weekends. You're like a machine today." Driving home that evening, Michael felt a quiet pride. It wasn't about being superhuman or proving himself. It was about feeling strong enough to say yes to life again. He knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be days when energy dipped or the body needed rest, but he also knew he'd found something that gave him an edge, something that helped him meet the demands of each day without running on empty. Garlic water had started as a small experiment, a way to care for his heart and immune system. But now he saw it as part of a bigger gift. It had given him back his stamina, his ability to do the things that made life full and rich. And as far as Michael was concerned, that was worth every single sip. Michael had been making garlic water for months now, and it had become as natural to him as brushing his teeth. In the beginning, he'd followed one method he found online and stuck with it. But over time, curiosity got the better of him. He began experimenting, trying different ways to prepare it, adjusting the flavor, and figuring out what worked best for both health and taste. What surprised him most was how easy it was to make garlic water fit into his routine, no matter how busy the day was. The first method Michael had ever tried was the simplest one. Crush 3 fresh garlic cloves, drop them into a mug, and pour hot water over them. He would then cover the mug with a small plate and let it steep for about 10 minutes. The heat released the garlic's distinct aroma and, more importantly, its beneficial compounds. He'd read that crushing garlic activated the allicin, the very thing responsible for so many of its health benefits. When the time was up, he'd sip it slowly, letting the warmth work its way through him. At first, the taste was strong, almost too strong, but adding a squeeze of lemon and a small spoonful of honey transformed it into something soothing, even enjoyable. One morning, after making his usual cup, Linda suggested trying it another way. "Why don't you boil it for a bit? It might mellow out the taste," she said. Michael decided to give it a try. He chopped the garlic cloves into small pieces, dropped them into a small saucepan of water, and let it boil gently for 5 minutes. The kitchen filled with the familiar garlicky aroma, but this time it was softer, less sharp. When he poured the warm liquid into his mug and took a sip, he found the flavor milder but still distinct. He liked this method for days when he wanted something gentler, almost like a garlic tea. It was also easier for Linda to drink this version, since she preferred a less intense taste. The third method came to Michael by accident. One night, he'd blended too much garlic while preparing dinner and didn't want to waste it. He remembered reading about a version of garlic water that was made cold, so he added the extra garlic to a jar of water, gave it a good stir, and left it covered on the counter overnight. The next morning, he stirred it again, letting the cloudy water swirl before pouring a glass. It wasn't hot and comforting like his usual cup. It was crisp and refreshing, almost like a garlic-infused detox drink. This method, he later learned, also preserved the garlic's raw potency since it wasn't exposed to heat. He saved it for warmer days when he wanted something cooling but still packed with benefits. Michael found that each method had its place. On cold winter mornings, the hot steeped version was his go-to, warming him from the inside out. On days when his throat felt scratchy or he wanted something gentler, the boiled version worked perfectly. And during the summer months, the cold-infused garlic water kept him hydrated while still delivering the health benefits he'd come to rely on. It wasn't just about flavor or temperature, it was about keeping the habit fresh and enjoyable. Michael knew from experience that even the best intentions could fade if they became too routine or monotonous. By having 3 different ways to make garlic water, he kept himself from slipping into boredom. Every choice in the morning felt intentional. What do I need today? Something warm and strong, something mild, something cool and refreshing. Linda also appreciated the variety. She began joining him more often in the mornings, sometimes making her own cup while he made his. "It's funny," she said one morning, "we've turned into our own little garlic cafe." Michael laughed at the idea, but in a way it was true. They were experimenting, learning, and finding joy in a shared ritual. Friends and neighbors soon got curious. When Michael mentioned garlic water in casual conversation, people often wrinkled their noses at first. "Isn't it too strong?" someone would ask. That was when Michael would explain the 3 methods, describing how each one tasted and what made it unique. Sometimes he'd even invite them over to try it. To his surprise, many left saying they were going to give it a shot themselves. One Saturday afternoon, he hosted a small garlic water tasting for a couple of close friends. They sampled all 3 versions, sharing their preferences and laughing about the differences. One friend preferred the boiled method for its softness, another liked the cold infusion for its refreshing bite. Michael didn't mind which one they chose, he was just happy they were open to it. For him, garlic water wasn't about convincing everyone to do it his way. It was about showing that small, healthy habits could be adaptable to anyone's taste. The more he shared the habit with others, the more he realized how much it had become a part of his identity. He wasn't just Michael, the retired teacher anymore. He was also Michael, the garlic water guy. And he wore that title with pride. It represented not just the drink itself, but the choice he'd made months ago to take charge of his health, one small, daily step at a time. Over time, Michael developed a rhythm. Some weeks he stuck with one method, enjoying the comfort of familiarity. Other weeks he switched it up daily, letting variety keep him curious. The important thing was that no matter which version he chose, he never skipped a day. That consistency, he knew, was where the real magic happened. As spring approached and the days grew warmer, Michael found himself leaning toward the cold infusion more often. He'd make a big jar in the evening, let it steep overnight, and pour himself a glass first thing in the morning. Sometimes he'd carry another jar out to the garden to sip while tending to his plants. It felt fresh and revitalizing, a perfect pairing for the season. Linda, for her part, continued to tweak the recipes. She experimented with adding mint leaves to the cold version, cinnamon to the boiled one, and even a touch of apple cider vinegar to the hot steeped version for an extra tang. Michael enjoyed them all. Each variation reminded him that health didn't have to be rigid or joyless. It could be creative, flavorful, and even fun. Looking back, Michael was glad he hadn't stuck to just one preparation method. Variety had kept him consistent, and consistency had given him results he could see and feel. His mornings no longer felt sluggish. His heart, lungs, and energy levels were stronger. And the ritual of making garlic water, whether hot, boiled, or cold infused, had become something he looked forward to each day. And perhaps most importantly, it was a ritual he and Linda could share, a small act of care that connected them every morning before the busyness of the day began. For Michael, that made each sip even more valuable. Michael's relationship with garlic water had been nothing but positive so far. It had become his quiet morning ritual, his way of sending his body a daily reminder. I'm taking care of you. But one afternoon during a routine checkup, his doctor gave him a piece of advice that made him pause. They were reviewing his latest blood work, which looked better than it had in years, when the doctor leaned back and said, "Michael, whatever you're doing is clearly working. Keep it up. But I also want to remind you, with garlic, more isn't always better." Michael was surprised. "What do you mean? It's just garlic water." The doctor smiled, but kept a serious tone. "It's still potent. Garlic can thin the blood, which is good for circulation, but if you're taking certain medications, especially blood thinners, it can cause problems, and if you ever need surgery, you'll want to stop it at least a week before." The reminder hit home. Michael wasn't on any major medications, but his brother Paul was, and he'd been thinking of suggesting garlic water to him. Now he realized it wasn't something to recommend without a bit of caution. The doctor went on, "Garlic can also irritate the stomach if you have ulcers or digestive issues. And for some people, too much raw garlic can cause bloating or heartburn. You're fine now because you've been consistent and moderate. Just keep it that way." Michael nodded, making a mental note. His habit had always been about balance, not extremes, and he wanted to keep it that way. That evening, over dinner, he told Linda about the conversation. She appreciated the reminder too. "It's like anything else," she said. "Even the healthiest things can cause trouble if we don't respect them." They agreed to keep an eye on how they felt and to always let their doctor know if they made changes to their routine. It made Michael think about how easy it was for health advice to spread without context. He'd seen people on the internet claiming you should eat 10 raw garlic cloves a day for maximum benefit. He winced at the thought. Not only would that make his breath unbearable, but it could actually harm him. He wanted his garlic water journey to be sustainable, something he could do for years without risking side effects. A week later, his neighbor George stopped by. George had recently started garlic water after Michael mentioned it, and he was enthusiastic. "I've been doubling the cloves," George said proudly. "Figure if a little is good, more must be better, right?" Michael remembered his doctor's warning and gently set the record straight. "Actually, George, my doctor says moderation is key. Too much garlic can thin your blood too much, especially if you're on meds. You might want to ask your doctor before you keep increasing it." George looked a bit startled. "Really? I had no idea." Michael nodded. "That's why I'm telling you now. It's better to be safe than sorry." That conversation reminded Michael that part of being committed to a health habit meant being responsible about how you shared it. It wasn't enough to talk about the benefits, you had to talk about the boundaries too. He began making a point of telling friends not just how garlic water had helped him, but also the importance of checking with a healthcare provider before starting, especially if they had existing health conditions. Over time, Michael came to appreciate this new layer of understanding. The warning didn't make him fear garlic water, it made him respect it. He saw it the way a seasoned gardener might see fertilizer, incredibly helpful when used correctly, but potentially harmful if overdone. Linda helped him think about it another way. "It's like sunlight," she said one morning as they sipped their mugs. "A little each day helps everything grow, but too much, and you can get burned." Michael liked that comparison. It fit perfectly. His garlic water was his morning sunshine, warm, nourishing, but best in moderation. In the months that followed, Michael kept his habit steady. 2 to 3 cloves, prepared in one of his 3 favorite methods, every morning. If he ever felt digestive discomfort or was scheduled for dental work or a medical procedure, he paused the habit for a short time, then resumed once it was safe. This flexibility kept the routine from ever becoming a source of stress or harm. The caution also deepened his gratitude for how well his body was responding. Knowing there could be downsides made him appreciate the upsides even more. He was more intentional with every sip, mindful that he was choosing balance over extremes. One summer evening, as he and Linda sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, Michael reflected on how far he'd come. A year ago, he'd been looking for a way to take control of his health. Garlic water had been the starting point, and it had given him so much: better heart health, stronger immunity, improved stamina, and a sense of daily purpose. But it had also taught him something even more valuable. True wellness comes not from doing everything, but from doing the right things in the right way. Michael knew he'd keep drinking his garlic water for as long as it served him well. And thanks to his doctor's warning, he'd also keep doing it with the wisdom to know when to pause, when to adjust, and when to share the habit responsibly with others. Because in the end, health wasn't just about adding good things, it was about knowing how to keep them in harmony. And for Michael, that balance was the real secret worth holding on to. It was early morning, and the kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the kettle heating water. Michael stood at the counter, crushing garlic cloves with the flat side of a knife. The familiar papery skins curling away under his fingers. The scent rose instantly, sharp yet comforting, a smell that had come to mean health, energy, and a kind of quiet hope. As he poured the steaming water over the garlic and covered the mug to steep, he thought about how this small act had changed his life over the past year. It was such a simple ritual, yet the ripple effects had touched every part of his day. His heart was stronger. His stamina had returned. His breathing felt easier, his skin brighter, his hair fuller. He moved through the seasons without the winter colds that used to drag him down, and his mind felt clearer than it had in years. Even his relationship with Linda had grown deeper in unexpected ways. Michael knew now that lasting health didn't come from one grand gesture or a quick fix. It came from the habits that anchored you day after day. Garlic water had become his anchor. It wasn't just the drink itself, but what it represented: consistency, self-respect, and the decision to invest in his own well-being. Every morning, it reminded him that the path to health was walked in small, steady steps. He smiled as Linda came into the kitchen, her robe wrapped snugly around her. She reached for the jar of honey and set it beside his mug. "Your morning medicine," she teased. He handed her a second cup he'd prepared just for her. They stood together in the quiet, sipping in companionable silence. It was a simple scene, but it held a richness that words couldn't quite capture, a sense of partnership, of shared commitment to living well. Michael thought back to the man he'd been before he started this journey, tired, a little discouraged, worried about what the next decade might bring for his health. That man had been unsure if he could really turn things around. Now he knew better. The proof was in how he felt every single day and in the way his doctor had raised an approving eyebrow at his latest checkup. He also knew that garlic water was only part of the picture. It had been the spark, yes, but it had inspired other changes too. More vegetables on the plate, longer walks in the park, better sleep, fewer late-night snacks. Each of those choices built on the others, creating a foundation that felt strong and stable. He could picture himself keeping these habits for years, not as a diet or a program, but simply as the way he lived. Sharing his experience had become its own source of joy. Friends and neighbors had started asking about his secret, and he'd tell them the truth. It wasn't magic, just a little garlic, some hot water, and a commitment to showing up for yourself every day. He always included the caveat his doctor had given him about moderation and medical conditions, because health, he believed, was as much about wisdom as it was about action. One afternoon, his grandson Caleb had asked him why he drank that smelly tea every morning. Michael laughed and explained that it helped keep him strong and healthy so he could play soccer with Caleb and go on long walks with Grandma. Caleb had nodded thoughtfully and then, to Michael's surprise, asked if he could try a sip. The boy made a face immediately, but Michael could see the spark of curiosity there. Maybe one day, when Caleb was older, he'd understand. As the months went by, Michael realized that the real gift of this journey was not just in the physical benefits, it was in how it had reshaped his relationship with his own life. He woke each day with a sense of purpose. He moved with more confidence, said yes to more invitations, and felt a renewed appreciation for the simple things. A shared meal, a walk in the sunshine, a quiet evening by the fire. There was also a sense of resilience that hadn't been there before. Life would inevitably bring challenges, illnesses, changes, losses, but Michael felt better equipped to meet them now. Taking care of his body had strengthened his spirit. It had shown him that no matter where you start, it's possible to change the trajectory of your health, one mindful choice at a time. As spring turned to summer, Michael and Linda began planning small adventures again. Weekend trips to the coast, afternoons exploring local trails, evenings hosting friends for dinner. These plans weren't just about filling the calendar, they were about living fully, about using the strength and energy they'd cultivated to create new memories. And every morning, before the day began, Michael would pour himself a mug of garlic water, take that first warm sip, and feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was doing his part to keep those days coming. He knew his path to lasting health wasn't a straight line. There would be days he missed a walk, or indulged in a rich dessert, or felt less energetic than he'd like. But he also knew that the path was wide enough to hold all of that. What mattered was not perfection, but persistence. Garlic water had taught him that. It had shown him that the most powerful changes often come from the smallest, most consistent acts. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, Michael turned to Linda and said, "You know, I think we've found our rhythm. This is the life I want to keep living." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Then let's keep doing what works." And so they did, day after day, season after season. A couple of crushed cloves, a kettle of hot water, a quiet moment of intention. It was simple. It was sustainable. And for Michael, it was the key to living not just longer, but better. Because in the end, the path to lasting health isn't about chasing a miracle. It's about building a life where taking care of yourself feels as natural as breathing. And for Michael, that path began with something as humble as a cup of garlic water. Michael's story began with quiet worry, tired mornings, fading stamina, and the unsettling realization that his health was slipping. One small decision, to try a simple cup of garlic water each day, set in motion a series of changes he could never have predicted. What started as a heart health experiment became so much more. His skin grew brighter, his breathing easier, his mind sharper. Winter passed without the colds that once kept him sidelined. His hair looked healthier, his waistline slimmer, and his legs carried him farther than they had in years. Even the quiet spark between him and Linda glowed warmer as shared walks and kitchen laughter became a treasured part of their days. Along the way, Michael learned balance, listening to his doctor's advice, respecting moderation, and understanding that garlic water wasn't magic, but a faithful companion on his path to wellness. It anchored his mornings, gave structure to his days, and inspired other small choices that built a healthier, more vibrant life. His journey was never about chasing youth, it was about reclaiming the freedom to live fully, to say yes to life without hesitation. And it all began with a habit so humble, so simple, that it could easily have been overlooked. If Michael's journey shows us anything, it's that the power to change doesn't disappear with age. It sits quietly in our everyday choices, waiting for us to take that first step. No matter your age, start with one small, consistent act for your health today, because the best years of your life might just be the ones you choose to begin living right now.